If I thought it would help, I would immolate myself in phobia of the camera crews, my counterclaim, but as we all know.
You're listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda, hosted by two teachers who break down a different propaganda song each episode. Today we're talking about Cop Just Out of Frame, track 3 from Victory Lap. And I picked this song this week because I wanted to contrast this week's episode with our first episode on Banger's Embrace, which we looked under a sharper lens. This is more representative of Propaganda's musical and lyrical style. The music is much more complex. The themes and the scenes conveyed are more serious and they're more pressing. And I think this song also has a level of introspection and self-reflection that maybe fans of their early music might not be aware of if they haven't kept up with their discography. So we have a special guest today. Chris, tell us about yourself.
Glad to. Hello, my name is Chris Deutsch. I'm a professor at the University of Missouri in a teaching postdoc position. My specialization is U.S. history, particularly politics and policy and broader social transformation of the post-war era. And I'm also happen to be a massive Propaganda fan. They're probably my most favorite band easily. So I'm super excited to combine a little bit of scholarship and teaching with the passion that I have for this music.
Fabulous. Chris, how did you get into Propaganda? Do you have like an origin story of when you first got into them?
Sure thing. I think as all of us can probably admit, it was in 1996 or so, around the time when Physical Fatness came out, and had heard a little bit of Nation State and stuff, but then that comp was the comp that absolutely made me into a Fat Wreck fan, and Propaganda's cover on that album certainly caught my ear, and then I got Let's Talk More Rock and poured over those songs for many, many years, and became a huge fan. And then Today's Empire Tomorrow's Ashes came out and it blew my mind.
Dude, yeah, absolutely.
It's like you get, because the style shift and the tone of the band shift and the amount of material packed into the disc itself, the physical disc of Today's Empire Tomorrow's Ashes, which had documentaries and just a bunch of information on it that just I was ready and receptive for, and it solidified my fandom, particularly with Purina Hall of Fame. Completely changed my life.
It's just such a special band. So you started with Let's Talk More Rock, yeah?
Oh yeah,
that was like
totally.
The first thing. So you did you miss How to Clean Everything for a little bit until you found that and went back to it?
Yeah, I was a little bit older as a teenager when I got into them, after they had already broke, and the Fat Sound in Northern California, where I was living, Sacramento, had already kind of begun to really take off in popularity to an extreme extent. And I just was a little slow to the party, but I've remained a lifelong fan ever since.
Were you like a Bay Area fan stuff? Were you into like, the Gilman stuff, or like No Use for a Name or anything coming out of that region as well?
Sure. It was a little later, but I got into like Cringer and all that stuff, and but in fact, one of the competing bands for favorite band is Good Riddance for me.
Yes.
So I'm a huge fan of that. And my earliest exposures were definitely the West Coast skater punk, kind of Epiphat stuff that was just everywhere.
Yeah, man, that you're just speaking my language here. I was like the biggest Operation Phoenix and Comprehensive Guide to Modern Rebellion like worshiper you could find, especially in St. Louis. Where Good Riddance was not huge. All right, so we are going down a rabbit hole here, but let's go back to what we're here to talk about today, which is the song "Cop Just Out of Frame" from Victory Lap. And we're going to talk a little bit about the progression, the lyrical content of the song, any personal connections any of us may have, the legacy and staying power of the song. And we're going to get into all of that. But I think it might be pertinent, since you're here and since you're a historian, we're going to get into some of the, a few of the specifics within this song, notably about the history of self-immolation and the presence of the venerable Mahayana Buddhist monk Thich Quang Duc in this song. And so the opening line of the song is, if I thought it would help, I would immolate myself. And then later in the song, a line reads, they say the Quang Duc's heart survived the flames unscarred, a righteous calling card left upon the palace gates for the invertebrates, their grip on power pried apart by just one frail human being, no weapon, no war machine. So to me, this is super heavy, and there's so much story that goes into this. And the big picture about this song to me is like of living in a society where the ideas you care about just aren't being heard, and going to an extreme degree to make your voice heard when you feel like nothing else can be done. So Chris, I want to talk a little bit about self-immolations. Can you talk a little bit about like what self-immolation is, and like what is like the broader purpose for self-immolation for folks like Thich Quang Duc who have done this in the past?
Sure. And I do want to make a little bit of a spoiler, but I definitely want to get to the 1950s, 1960s context as we talk about this. But the practice that he was practicing was Shenshen. It's in its Chinese form, and it's a form of self kind of negation when you've reached a kind of certain status or certain capabilities as a Buddhist practitioner, the way he had, in fact, was maybe as old as 70 when he did what he did. So in this sense, it's like having reached a level to be able to kind of give yourself in an appropriate way. That's basically the practice he was following, being fully, and in fact, the actual event itself, when he actually lit himself on fire, how he did so was very much a religious expression. So basically, it is a part of Buddhism. Okay.
And so, can you tell us a little bit about like the context of what this man, Thich Quang Duc, Thich means most revered in Buddhism. So this is like a title, an honorific title for, a venerated master. What was going on with in Vietnam at the time that would cause like a Vietnamese Buddhist to to light yourself on fire in a public intersection in broad daylight?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to point out that I'm drawing from some scholarly works, particularly Edward Miller's Misalliance and Eugene Ford's Cold War Monks, Marilyn B. Young's Vietnam Wars, and a couple other works as well to kind of describe what the ultimate kind of context was for all of this. And there's I think two kind of interesting contexts because of the event and how it's been memorialized, and particularly within the context of the song, that are kind of essential to the story. And one is the resurgence and the reconfiguration, really, of Buddhism after World War II, particularly with the decolonization of South Asia, as it heated up, as national leaders began kind of discussing, like, what does it mean to be an independent republic in the modern stage? Buddhism was a huge part of that. And emerging out of this time was, in fact, an international Buddhist organization trying to figure out, like, what is the new role for Buddhism if these regions, which had been under colonial governance for a really long time, get a chance to decide who they are as a country. Like, what is the national or even international role? And this is part of a really important broad discussion going on in this region among elites and religious leaders for what to do next. So Buddhism itself is beginning to take on a new role. People are beginning to think about Buddhism in new ways, pushing around on some of the tenets of disengagement and national politics. And the Cold War is a hugely important center of all of this, because unsurprisingly, the United States was involved in trying to shape the discourse, trying to prevent China, trying to prevent the communist countries or communist countries that might emerge from affecting or influencing Buddhism at all. And this took place really in the 1950s going into the 1960s. And in fact, Vietnam's own Buddhist population wasn't terribly noteworthy until something, the event we're talking about, 1963, something really big happened.
Mm.
And they were kind of overwhelmed by other concerns coming out of like Thailand and a couple other areas. And the big conflict in Vietnam and why they suddenly mattered, and in fact, why the biggest post-war post-war Buddhist event is in Vietnam, is because of the makeup of the country as it was split into two, and how the two sides were dealing with that split.
Mm. And I read a little bit about the demographics of the country at the time, and I think that in South Vietnam, there was something like 70 to 90% of the nation was Buddhist, but the country was being run by a Catholic leadership who was not really responding to the needs of the demands of the Buddhist sector of the population, right? Was there like some kind of like an uneven addressing of the agenda within the different religions in the country?
Yeah, that's really good. That's definitely a very important part. So the Vietnamese situation is really actually has a long history connecting itself to the United States, connecting itself to the international community, because of a man by the name of Ho Chi Minh, as early as 1918, began trying to reach out to the international community, particularly the United States, after World War I ended, to try to get Vietnamese independence from French colonization. And it matters that the French colonized Vietnam because they brought with them Catholic missionaries, a presupposed Catholic faith, and this put Catholicism into a pretty varied country, where the countryside followed a kind of Buddhism that was very much not an orthodox style of Buddhism, one that mixed animism and folk traditions into the Buddhism that they practiced. And when the Vietnamese tried to push for independence after World War II, that ended up with a really brutal war against the French, which the United States supported in favor of the French, despite earlier slightly warm feelings and potential willingness to support Ho Chi Minh. And the person they picked to lead what became of the war, when the French surrendered and a partition that was supposed to be temporary was put in place, was a very Catholic, very pro-free Vietnamese person by the name of Ngo Dien Diem, who was actually in New Jersey at the time and was tapped to go to Vietnam and find a way to win an election, which he did. So he took over for the Emperor Bao Dai, and Diem and his brother set up a government by 1956, 1957. They had the beginnings of a government. And while this was happening, about 1 million Catholics fled the north as Ho Chi Minh consolidated his power, set up a state, set up a communist, so therefore atheist government. That those million or so fled south, and they added to about 500,000 or so that were already there, Catholics who were already there, Catholic Vietnamese who were already there, and they consolidated power, particularly getting lucrative and important administrative jobs, the kind of jobs that were to be the heart of a middle-class society in South Vietnam, which was the project of this whole enterprise.
Whenever we bring Quang Duc into the picture, so Quang Duc, who appears in this Propagandhi song, he's super well known. People may not know his name because, but they will recognize the cover of the Rage Against the Machine record that he appears on. This is one of the most famous photographs of all time. So, I was digging around in this a little bit, and I found this that Thich Quang Duc set himself on fire on June 11th, 1963. So we're almost at the 57th anniversary of his self-immolation, and he's protesting South Vietnam's government, advancement of the Catholic minority agenda, the persecution of the Buddhist majority. So, like, there's also this tons of corruption I heard about within the Diem administration. Was there any corruption going on within this administration as well that the Buddhists would be particularly angry about?
Yeah, it is. The corruption came in the form of perceived favoritism, particularly Diem's brother, who was in charge of the security apparatus and potentially jockeying to be the true power behind the throne. So leading into early 1963, there was a real clampdown on having flags that were religious in nature flying, particularly above the South Vietnamese flag or in place of the South Vietnamese flag. And after massive Easter celebrations for Catholics, which involve lots of flags, the Buddhists tried to celebrate May 8th, which is an important Buddhist ceremony, and the government tried to lock down the use of flags. And the city of Hue, which was the imperial capital, it's kind of towards the north, so it's pretty close to the border. That city in particular becomes a lightning rod when the celebrations were attempted, flags were attempted to be waved, and at a radio station, a massacre occurs in which the military forces in the area end up engaging civilians who had occupied the radio station, thus setting up a massive friction. It was if the pressure was building behind the dam, that was the crack that began it leaking. And in the weeks that followed, Buddhist leaders within the country tried to figure out what to do next. And they had lists of demands, and particularly led by Thich Tri Guan, who was a leader of the Buddhist movement. They ended up organizing a march in Saigon in June, set to basically be a presentation of a manifesto that had already been circulating. And this is when the procession walks down the street. There's some cars involved, so it's partly a motorcade. In particular, Quan Duc is inside the vehicle. The night before, he had penned an explanation of what's going to happen, and they had told the U.S. English-speaking media to show up at this intersection so that they could get a good story. Of course, very fatefully, one person shows up, Malcolm Brown, and in a ceremonial fashion, Quang Duc sits down in the lotus position. He's wearing his formal attire for his faith, and helpers, his assistants, they pour gasoline on him, and then they hand him a book of matches where he sets himself on fire, and rather famously doesn't flinch, jerk around, scream out in pain, which we're never really gonna know what it's like to be set on fire, but I think Hollywood's kind of right that you can't really, it's easy to flail around when you're on fire.
Well, and I read a couple things today saying that he had wooden mala beads, and he was also chanting sutras while he was burning. And at one point, he pushed himself back up because he was starting to fall over, but he was still chanting and he was still alive. So he pushed himself back up into position so that he could keep chanting as he was dying, essentially.
Yeah, because of his death unfolded the way it did, I think it takes a kind of mysticism about it, one that speaks to his own faith's point of view about his act. So it really does speak to his particular Buddhist position on self-immolation. And something to keep in mind about what he was doing is it was indeed about Buddhism in Vietnam. In fact, before he died, he wrote that when Buddhism prospers, the nation prospers. And he wrote, when Buddhism declines, the nation declines. And so the reason why he did was really located within Vietnam in the midst of a global Buddhist kind of renaissance, reinvigoration, reapproach, while also dealing with local issues regarding a minority government in the form of a heavily Catholic government facing off against a majority of the population that were beginning to feel increasingly like the brothers in charge were refusing to listen to their demands and were cracking down increasingly. And in fact, in the aftermath of this, Buddhists would be targeted, pagodas would be attacked, in part to try to frame the military to diffuse the likelihood of a coup. But of course, once the pagoda attacks in August of 1963 were reported, the U.S. government, particularly within some jockeying positions, ultimately concludes that it's okay if the Diem brothers are deposed. So in November, rather again, active karma or fate or the accidents of history, the Diem brothers are couped against, are killed in the coup in November 1963 by the military leadership who know the United States will support the outcome. And then shortly thereafter, JFK himself is taken out in a political assassination.
Well, and I know there were also several immolations that followed
Mhm.
Quang Duc as well. He wasn't the only one. He kind of set off this little chain reaction between his immolation and the deposing of Diem. Keith, I know that you were finding some stuff about JFK as well. What'd you find out?
Yeah, so reading about how the U.S. supported the Diem regime, one thing that I saw was a quote from Kennedy when he asked the Secretary of State Dean Rusk and presidential advisor Roger Hilsman. He said, "Then the question: what do we do to protect our own prestige, and also to make it see if we can have this thing continue on successfully? Do you have any thought about that?" So it seems as much like Kennedy, in the wake of this, is concerned much more about how it's going to make the United States appear in the region.
Yeah, I mean that's the sad truth is in many ways that's the driving animating force behind U.S. policy at this time. Is there's the a kind of a broad and generalized acceptance of what President Eisenhower rather famously called the domino effect. If one country falls, the dominoes of the region will fall, and of course the falling would mean the rise of a communist government. And this is a key moment when there is a lightning rod figure in charge of the South government. And he has created a somewhat stable apparatus. There is a somewhat prosperous group of peoples within Saigon in particular, but in other areas of the country that are beginning to be able to live that consumerist lifestyle where they can go to the store with their money, buy stuff, bring it home, make sure that their family has a lot of clothes, they can maybe travel internationally, get good schooling. And that's kind of what the overall goal was, because in the minds of the Kennedy administration, particular figures like McNamara, the Secretary of Defense, and some others had come up with this plan that if that's what South Vietnam looked like, there'd be no need for communism, that the North would just continue to starve itself to death. The North had gone through an incredibly terrible late 1950s as collectivization led to massive suffering. And their thinking was all they had to do was just outlast. And so with Diem in place, as long as the people were more willing to put up with him than not, it was fine. And it's kind of a weird myth we have of autocrats or theocrats or dictators or authoritarians or totalitarians. We seem to think that they don't need popular approval. But if they do have to spend so much time fighting their enemies inside the country, if they turn the people into an enemy, then they're weakened. Then they can be taken down. That's exactly what happened here, where generals had been, or particularly mid-level military officers had been sniping at these at the government's heels with maybe potentially even forming coups that never happened because the United States government just wasn't willing to support. But then after he killed himself, we have, after Quang Duc kills himself, we have a moment where there is a decrease in the credibility of the government, as it seems increasingly like the charges made by the Buddhist majority, particularly the leadership of the Buddhist faith and the more fervent adherents, seems to be bearing out as true, that you can't really fudge the numbers to make it look like everyone's got religious equality or freedom of some variety, but that there is true favoritism going on. And so when it came time to decide what to do, ultimately the best evidence that I've seen of Kennedy is that he wishy-washied. He okayed the coup more because he didn't have a stronger plan. And so when it happened, he then had to lead the US response in a way that ensured that whoever came out on top, it looked good for the United States, because in countries like Indonesia or in other countries in the region, there was real concern that Chinese communist and particularly Russian or USSR communist infiltration or support was really going to prop up a communist insurgency that would actually work. And the model of China and of the continued war, the stalemated war, the lack of peace between North Korea and South Korea kind of still loomed large.
So, Chris, I read we mentioned Malcolm Brown, who took the photograph that later won him a Pulitzer Prize. He later wrote a memoir called Money, Boots, and Red Socks. And He said that he didn't go to Vietnam harboring any opposition to America's role in the Vietnamese Civil War,
Yeah.
but that later on, it was the shadow war carried out by the Kennedy administration that changed his views. So, what specifically would have changed his views?
Yeah, unfortunately, I haven't read his specific, like if there was a particular military action on the ground that he saw. But in
So,
general,
in reference to
sorry.
in reference to this shadow war, then.
Yeah, that's, I can speak a bit more about that in broad terms, just to clarify. And it's basically this is the birth of counterinsurgency as a modern form in the United States, the birth of the Green Berets, the birth of basically taking people, calling them advisors, integrating them into units of another country, and then training those units to engage in activities against insurgents and have them act as combat troops and advisors and trainers and support in various ways, while all claiming to the United States that there's no real fighting going on. And this is particularly becomes kind of a really big controversial issue, that before the land war formally kicks off, or the land action formally kicks off, in following the Gulf of Tonkin incident in August 1964, that there is a ramp up of U.S. combat troops, but called something else. And this did include, extrajudicial assassinations, targeted hunts against people, violations of civil rights and civil laws all across the board, to try to achieve aims that would make the communists look so bad that they're not worth supporting, thus achieving the goal, which is to collapse popular support of communism.
Quang Duc's self-immolation was, it reverberated across time. I mean, we're still thinking about this today, and his impact is undeniable. And so he set out to get attention to the Buddhist majority's plight within South Vietnam at the time. And as tragic as it sounds, because he killed himself, his purpose was achieved, I think. Do you think that this was like, did he succeed in not in just like setting himself on fire, but do you think that his message was received as he intended it?
Yeah, this is I think this is where it gets a little more complex, and we need to we can think of it in two ways. One is we can put ourselves in the moment of, say, June 1963, and try to understand what, if we could, speak Vietnamese, what Quang Duc was saying to his immediate circle, and the words that he was writing and what they intended to have. And then there's the symbology of it that I think is why we still talk about it today. And in the one hand, he had hoped to kind of bridge and mend and heal the fractures that were happening in society, particularly between the Catholic and the Buddhists, where the Buddhist sense of treatment was that they were being treated poorly. And he had hoped to push the government to undo any kind of regulations that were hurting Buddhists and change how they're enforcing the law to make it more equitable. And in that sense, he failed, because what he ultimately did is he brought about the downfall of a government by a military coup of the top leadership of the military, and the establishment of a series of troikas and coup governments, and a rather large turmoil for the most part in the South Vietnamese leadership until the government collapsed in 1975. So on some level, he did not achieve his goal. Now, he did become a massive symbol for Buddhism in general as well. So the regional effects are rather strong. And that's why I opened up a little bit with the inter-regional Buddhism, is because it was a rather unknown fight for as far as what the Buddhist movement was kind of dealing with at the time, that became the symbol of global Buddhism after the war, of the self-negation and the ability to use peaceful protest, in a sense, of to attack a government that seems like it's out of control or seems like it can't represent you.
Interesting. Well, and I kind of went down a self-immolation pursuit today, an inquiry, if you will, where I was looking at, I found out about a man named Norman Morrison, who was an American Quaker who burned himself outside the Pentagon. And he became fairly renowned within Vietnam as well. And then I also read the story today of Mohamed Bouazizi. I think that's how you say his name, in Tunisia, who said he was a fruit vendor who essentially self-immolated and ignited the Arab Spring. And then his immolation was followed by self-immolations in Egypt, Mauritania, Algeria. So that was extremely influential. And then you also have on the other hand, you have a man named David Buckle, who was an attorney who self-immolated in April of 2018 in Brooklyn's Prospect Park to protest climate change inaction. And I read a great profile in The Guardian today from an article about him in April 2019. But his self-immolation did not ignite a worldwide movement per se in response in the way that like Thich Quang Duc has become so revered. And then there's tons of other examples in history. There was Czech protests against the Soviets in 1968. There was Indian students self-immolating in 1990. Kurds did it in 1990. Tibetan monks did it in 1998. Like, I'm curious if you have any like theories as to why some of these self-immolations are so profoundly impactful and some we just see as like, oh well, and we just like, and it doesn't make as much impact as the person would like.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly the ones that happened relating to the war speak for themselves in the sense that like Quang Duc's own self-immolation created a template that people began being able to interpret, see, and understand, particularly because Quang Duc's own resistance to particularly a government that gets a particularly bad rap, I mean, for good reason, but also when in regards to other governments of the region isn't necessarily like as bad as, or isn't necessarily that much worse than the others, or even as bad as some of the others. It certainly speaks to resistance to that level of anti-democratic, authoritarian, warmongering, violent police state that I think in the immediate years afterwards, immediate decades afterwards, kind of had an emotional resonance, particularly for the people who read the stories that the photo was attached to first off on June 2nd or June 12th or 13th, 1963, when actually the film was actually smuggled out of South Vietnam because he knew that the censors would destroy it. So he had it shipped by a friend without telling what was on the camera to the newly liberated Philippines, the newly independent Philippines. And it was then there sent to international newspapers.
Amazing. Keith, I know that you teach a lot about Vietnam in your own social studies classrooms. Do you ever like show this image to your own 8th grade students?
So I don't get to this era. So my content in Indiana is colonial America to Reconstruction. So unfortunately, I actually never make it here in terms of like classroom curriculum.
Hey, Chris, did it, when Victory Lap came out in 2017, when this song came on and you heard the line, they say that Quang Duc's heart survived the flames unscarred, what was your reaction in that moment as a history scholar and professor?
I mean, yeah, it's always a two-minded thing. It's really weird. Like, there's the one where it's the history where it's like, well, kind of. But as an super propaganda fan, totally into music, it's like wiping the tear away and how, emotionally invested I am in the climax of the song as it, blisters into the amazing shreddy outro that lasts like a minute or whatever.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, I'm absolutely in the song. I'm absolutely feeling Chris's point, the kind of self-loathing and frustration at the privilege of being too privileged to really be able to do this kind of truly self-sacrificing role protest, while at the same time, as a historian, the truth of how effective it was and why it was effective and whose interest it served is a bit more complex. So it's like a weird duality.
Yeah. Does it knowing all of that, do you have a hard time like letting go and enjoying in the music as a music fan?
No, luckily, propaganda makes it easy.
Nice. Keith, what do you think about the music? So it's a very melodic song for Propaganda. It's very mid-tempo. It has that riffy little midsection that's kind of like a little metal. And then that very long, drawn-out jam that Chris just mentioned at the end with that really fast like guitar picking, but the very slow drums. What do you think about the music?
So to me, it's like a Mobius strip of hope and then despair and then back to hope again. I think it might be my favorite mid-tempo Propaganda song with Chris on lead vocals. The opening has this like massively bright, like hopeful chord progression. The guitar tones are incredibly thick and warm and inviting, for a lack of a better word. And then the lyrics change, right? And he says, like, well, who am I kidding? I don't know anything about sacrifice and selflessness. And I think the song switches gears and the tone becomes maybe somber. And especially it has like those big roaring guitar leads underneath when he says, you know, who do I think I'm fooling? So it starts hopeful. It switches to like introspective, but like self-deprecating, like you said. And it has all these pieces, right, or pieced together with these acrobatic proggy riffs, like at the 1 minute and 5 second mark. I mean, that could fit on, you know, a thrash album. And I think the outro is one of my favorite pieces, like Chris said, that they've ever written. Like super fast tremolo picking. You have in an incredibly short song a ton of ideas packed in, like lyrically, historically, and then you have this long time to really think about and soak in as there's this monstrous shredding outro going on. But for me, like my favorite part is actually the most straightforward at the end, like the sing along part. You know, they say that Quang Duck's heart. Under that, it's so simple, but that part with like just the vocals, to me, if you keep track at home and you have like a tally mark of how many times in future episodes I say that like a song of theirs has made me cried, this is going to be the very first tally, because that part there provides me with some hope that perhaps, like, you know, the rest of the song doesn't.
Chris, what do you think about the music? Does this like the progression of the song, does it speak to you in any particular ways, like it does to Keith here, where it has like the happy, then the brooding, then the happy again?
Yeah, I totally fell for it, especially the first time where it's like, what? Oh my gosh. Coming out of the Christopher Hitchens rebuttal.
Right.
And
yeah, seriously, I can't wait to talk about that too.
Yeah,
Another time.
It's a good do. I link the two songs in my head to like a really strong degree because I feel that they provide this kind of emotionally really kind of taxing and tiring journey through the ideas that he's thinking about, and both really do have a lot to do with indigenous rights and the rights of the oppressed, and particularly when it comes to groups who lack access to the state, to formal state power, and whose own governments, or in the case of indigenous peoples, governments who claim ownership over, that there's this kind of real tension over how to deal with that, being a person who is from the benefited group. And that's why I like that. That's why I really like the songs kind of like really lament and the kind of perverse sense of desire to be so pure. And like the kind of fact that he can't be.
Yeah. Well, and what's also so interesting is that Chris Hanna he's been thinking about these ideas for a long time. I mean, if you go back to all of the Propaganda records, like the man thinks about stuff nonstop. And, you know, this song, Keith, as you just said, it seems like who am I fooling? I can't do anything. Do you know what I mean? So like, do you think this is like almost like a retrospective of looking at their entire career of caring about stuff like this and being like, wow, I am so powerless. And this man, Thich Quang Duc, did so much in this one moment that I could never achieve something like this. Does that make sense?
One thing that I read was from David Anthony, who hosts the Alkaline Trio podcast. And he wrote a really great article. Yeah, he wrote a really great article from Vice when Victory Lap came out. And he talked about how, I'll read it here. It says, a song like Cop Just Out of Frame sees Hanna asking himself what he really knows of sacrifice and struggle, bartering with what it means to sing songs of resistance when other people are the recipients of such violence. And that's something that I think connects me with this track too. Like, I'm just a guy from the Midwest who is the son of like a steel administrator in a major steel factory, and he paid for me to go to school. And I learning about certain issues in college and thinking that just because I side with them that I'm a part of it, but I'm not. Like, I could read about something and I could side with the oppressed, but that doesn't mean that I'm actually doing anything. So for me, part of the journey is thinking like, well, man, if the guy who's singing a song that's a protest song feels like he's not doing enough and he's like singing the song, I'm just the guy listening to it. So
Yeah.
I'm technically doing even less. And that really makes me think about like what it means to be either informed or to be an activist or to take part and create meaningful change.
Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't made the connection before, but I really see this in surprisingly strong dialogue with Adventures in Psychosis.
Yeah.
Because it really is that, like, I really feel the kind of oldness, the kind of dad punk. Like, I think this is Propagandi's most dad punk in
Absolutely.
terms of theme. And it's one that I fortunately, in one of my strong emotional attachments to Propaganda, comes with similarly going through some very interesting and unexpected political changes within myself, where I came of age politically with the anti-globalization movement, 99, 2000, 2001, where Propagandi's works, their points about the nation state being, the one tool that keep corporations in check, because if we thought nation states were bad, well, guess what? There's an even worse power out there. To their anti-Iraq war stance and various other issues that they brought up. Particularly, one of the things that I absolutely love about Propaganda is their connection to indigenous North American rights, which I think it's a model that I wish every band could follow, because it's definitely, if you're in North America, having an opinion about that issue is really important. And to come around to think about your long career and wonder, what did I achieve and what legacy can I leave?
Yeah, it's heavy. And, like Propaganda living up in Manitoba in Canada, it took me living in Saskatchewan, which is the neighboring province in Canada, to ever really start thinking about those issues myself, because I had it's a widely discussed national dialogue in Canada in ways that it is totally not in the United States. And I had amazing Indigenous professors in my master's program up at the U of S, and and then I so many things for Propaganda clicked into place for me when I lived in Canada. It was a way that the band began to resonate with me in entirely new ways, because a lot of the things that I didn't personally understand fell into place whenever I moved up there as well. So, so let's talk about the lyrics a little bit here, a little bit more. So the opening line, if I thought it would help, whenever I heard that line, it sounds like Tim from Rise Against to me, which cracked me up. And I was like, this is like a stone cold ringer for Tim McElrath from Rise Against. And earlier, Keith, I think you mentioned that the song is super short. 22 lines of lyrics. And so we've talked about so many things already. And I also really like Chris's vocal delivery. He has a way of singing that I think is different from a lot of people, because, Propaganda is not like a super sing-along band. They don't have big anthems. They're not super like chorusy. And he has a way of connecting the lines by splitting in the middle of a sentence. Mm-hmm. So, for example, he says, "Who do I think I am fooling as if I know the first thing of sacrifice or selflessness?" So he splits the lines like in the middle of the sentence and attaches like the first half of a line, and then he attaches the second half of the first line to the first half of the second line. So the way that he strings it all together, it just shows me like the art of songwriting, because I've tried to write songs in the past, and the way that you construct and put the lyrics in and deliver it in a certain way that fits within the music is really hard. So the way that Chris Hannah splits up his sentences and connects them across sentences, like he sings across a period essentially, the end of a thought. He sings across the end of a thought and into the next thought. Do you guys understand what I'm talking about at all?
Oh, for sure. Like if you gave someone like a standard pop song, like I feel like never hearing it, you can maybe still read the songs and like create a melody or create a rhyme scheme out of it. But if you just had these lyrics, you would have no idea what the structure of the song would be for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it actually, I somewhat ironically calls to mind. I really don't know if there is a connection, but I think it's no mistake that NoFX, Fat Mike, has been long since doing this. That's one of his lyrical specialties, is delivering lines in exactly the same way, where they're each able to, in their own way, find a way to deliver clunky sentences that aren't pop ready, but really make them catchy and come alive, and the meaning come out through how they're singing.
It makes this style of music and this kind of song totally unique almost, because NoFX is also pretty renowned for not doing that many choruses either. Fat Mike brags all the time, I don't even sing choruses. Like if you listen to any interview with the man, he talks about how they don't do choruses. So a line that really, to me, is incredibly important. So we talked so much about the history of self-immolation. We talked a lot about Thich Quang Duc, who self-immolated in protest of, issues in South Vietnam in 1963. And if somebody were to not dive very, very deeply into the reason for these self-immolations, it would be very easy to label them as crazy or insane. And so Chris, in the lyrics, he says, but as we all know, the only tale that would be told would be that it was me, not them, who was insane. So Chris says he would immolate himself, but if he did it, he knows that people would label him as crazy instead of the thing that he was protesting against. What do you guys think? What do you guys think about this? The fact that like people who would do something like this, we would automatically, it'd be so easy to label them as crazy on, 24-hour cable news and say, oh, some crazy person burned themselves alive today. Oh, well, they were nuts. Like, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, this is something I addressed in my 8th grade class. I think this speaks to how a lot of people in the U.S. and elsewhere, we tend to venerate and romanticize protest in American history, especially in the American Revolution. But public protest that pushes for like political and social change in the present is mocked and ridiculed, and it's seen as something outside of like our historic tradition of protesting. Chris, what do you think?
Damn, that's a damn good point. That's the kind of thing. Yeah, that's a very, very, very important insight. And I think it speaks to his own kind of position in society, where he is kind of separated from the kind of communities that would make this more maybe romanticized or more easy to interpret. And as a person who has a lot of privilege and is secure economically and all that he's easy to dismiss.
Yeah, like his reasons wouldn't be severe enough because he lives a fortunate life, just like the three of us, most likely, and then he also talks in the song, in the line, he says, they say that Quang Duc's heart survived the flames unscarred. And so there's a really interesting backstory behind the heart of Quang Duc. So he self-immolated, he died. The Buddhists retrieved his body from the authorities that took his body. So the Buddhists had to get his body back. Then they put him through a second bodily cremation ceremony where his body then broke down entirely. And then what happened was, in the ashes, there was the heart from the inside of his body that was remaining in the bottom of these ashes. And apparently it was like black and hardened, but intact. So I just found that out today, that his heart, which Chris sings about as being surviving the flames unscarred, was actually after a second full body cremation. Like, do you know anything about the heart at all, Chris?
No, I haven't read anything that says anything specific about the heart, so I don't know if it ended up becoming a national symbol.
Yeah, there's a few things that people could read. I was reading some stuff in Lion's Roar, which is a Buddhist magazine publication, and there's an article by Rod Mead Sperry called "Uncovering the Buddhist Monk at the Center of One of the Most Significant Images of the Modern Age," where he breaks down the Rage Against the Machine 1992 album cover. And then there's also another article that I found called "The Burning Heart of a Bodhisattva," which was published by a man named Edward Tick on the 55th anniversary of Thich Quang Duc's self-immolation, also in Lion's Roar. So there's a few things that people can read. And then I also saw a Time magazine article from 2011 called "A Brief History of Self-Immolation," which was great as well. And so the heart is like, there's ceremonies that they do in Vietnam related to Thich Quang Duc's heart to this day. There's also a massive monument on the site of the self-immolation that people can go and see. And if you Google image search the Thich Quang Duc, monument, it's really amazing because it's a statue of him, and there are flames that are like 15 or 20 feet high in the monument site. So it's really amazing.
You know what comes to mind is a lyric from Anti-Manifesto when he says, "Word acrobatics performed with both harness and net," right? Like he could say this, he could say, "I would do this," but like we've all just said, like, let's be real. We're making a podcast about it. So the level of self-awareness that he had even then, but is even more open about, I think that's something that I appreciate a lot in the lyricism.
Let's talk about the title really quick too.
Yeah.
So the title of the song, "Cop Just Out of Frame," in no way references Thich Quang Duc, in no way references self-immolation, does not reference this person living with privilege like we've talked about. And it references a police officer. And I was reading today that there were police officers on the scene during the self-immolation, and the Vietnamese people who were on the scene during Thich Quang Duc's self-immolation were reacting with horror, with tremendous sadness, and women in the crowd started prostrating themselves on the ground in front of his burning body. And then also there were police officers there who also prostrated their own bodies. So the police officers who were there for crowd control were so overwhelmed with the scene that they prostrated themselves on the ground. And to me, like "Cop Just Out of Frame," what this means to me is that it represents a police officer who sees atrocities committed, or somebody who is like ordered to do something that they don't agree with doing, and then they just can't go through with it. So that's kind of where I'm going with the title of the song. What do you guys think the song title specifically means?
Yeah, I think when I first saw the track listing when the album was coming out, I thought it was going to be straightforward about police brutality, like in a reference to body cams. And then hearing the song and seeing that when he says, I don't know anything about the selflessness of a cop just out of frame who at first sight of the flames prostrates himself, lays down on the ground. So he's saying that he doesn't even have the selflessness of this person in power who lies down. And I think that's, for me, like really thinking about this song a little deeper this last week, connecting even with him and not the person who's actually sacrificing himself.
Yeah, I mean, it's a powerful statement about being a privileged person who has constant advantage and trying to figure out an alternative politics to counter or to undo or to minimize the harm. When an actual earnest event appears, you're yearning to be so pure as this person was, but realizing that you just don't have it in you, or you just haven't had the chance to develop these kind of ideas.
Hmm. Do either of you have like any like personal connections to this song? Like, did anything like from your own life spring to mind as you were like listening to this song over the last couple of years since its release?
So thinking back this week, after I graduated college, I served in the Peace Corps. I lived in Ukraine for 2 years, and I remember very early on in my service with very limited Russian ability. My first month or two, a Ukrainian man asked me like, "Oh, why are you here?" And I said, "Pomagat," which means like to help. And because I didn't know what else to say. It's all I could really
Help.
say. And he said like, "How are you going to help?"
Yeah.
And like that short response kind of put me in my place in that thinking, I'm a young Midwesterner with a degree and I'm going to go change the world. And these people are like, we're here before you, we'll be here afterwards. So I think with that self-reflection and not necessarily like trying to like mock or be deprecating in any way, just being realistic. Like the older I've gotten, maybe like less idealistic and more realistic. Like really, what is it that I'm going to do that's going to make a long-term impact, like directly in front of me, my classroom, maybe my community. But it's easy to feel like, global events are just out of your control or out of your power.
Well, I guess it's my turn to share. I am a military veteran, so I served in the armed forces for a couple of years there, and I never really harbored any such illusions, and certainly by the end, I was definitely not a believer in the righteousness of U.S. forces. It does strike me that I don't quite read this as less idealistic, but more like reassessing what it means to be idealistic. Since there is a kind of perversity in this song, and like it still is very idealistic to want to feel that pure burn, to want to believe in the fact that Quang Duc did have this kind of power, when the truth of the matter is that the Buddhist situation in Vietnam didn't get better after his death, and in fact heightened. The contradictions, the contentiousness of the issue became even more fraught, and it would eventually be crackdowns, and pagodas would be raided, and who knows how many people were killed or lost their life. And in fact, military leadership conquered the non-military leadership and held the grip of power on the government until the North invaded in 1975. So there is a kind of there's a kind of odd duality in the song that haunts me. I mean, my first initial instinct was definitely like, yes, I have had those kind of delusions or illusions that I could do this kind of grand act and achieve such similar goals, when the reality is I'm not that person. But at the same time, as I grow older, seeing the limitations or unexpected aspects of such ideology or such idealism.
Chris, do you think so? Whenever I hear the song title "Cop Just Out of Frame," and I know that there were police officers on the scene during the self-immolation who were prostrating themselves on the ground in front of Thich Quang Duc's burning body, do you think that is like a statement on cops being asked to do something that they disagree with?
Yeah, I think there's a subtle kind of acknowledgement of the soldiers themselves, the cops themselves, are drawn from kind of economic and social strata that doesn't really give them the power to say no. That is, as much as cops are the physical actors, physically completing the task of imperial or anti-democratic violence or structural racism or sexism or transphobia or whatnot, that they also are limited in the choices that they had in life to not end up in this exact same position. There's a really good historian by the name of Heather Thompson who wrote on Attica, and one of the most successful things she did is humanized the really mean, brutal guards of Attica when it was retaken, and let us understand the fact that the local community in which the prison population or the prison was situated in, and the local population that became the guards, had a lot more in common than the guards did with the leadership of New York State, of New York's of the power structures that guided the enforcement of penal code in the prison. And I think you're seeing us. I think that is an important thing you bring up, like a subtle point that's very powerful.
Well, I'm gonna have to read that book too, because I live in Buffalo, which is not super far away from Attica at all. So Chris, one of the things we like to do is we like to talk about connections that this song brings up in us. And, you've mentioned a bunch of books at the very beginning of this conversation. Do you want to remind people some of the connections that you've drawn from while discussing this song and the history?
Sure. So there's a book by Eugene Ford called Buddhism and America's Secret Strategy in Southeast Asia. Excuse me, it's Cold War Monks, Buddhism, America's Secret Strategy in Southeast Asia. That's a book that talks about, it's really focused on Thailand more than anything else, because Thailand was the heart of the Buddhist movement of the post-war era, but it connects this event and his sacrifice and the sudden emergence of a globally recognized Buddhist figure in its Buddhist context, and not Vietnamese Buddhist context, but regional Buddhist context. And connects it to the U.S. strategy at the time. And then there's also Edward Miller's Misalliance, which is about really the ZM government and its rise and collapse. And Marilyn B. Young's The Vietnam Wars, which is just a classic book on the Vietnam Wars, particularly looking at U.S. policy. Another war to mention would be Lien Hong Nguyen's Hanoi's War, which talks actually about how the North fought a war for peace. And so she's able to dig into who was in charge of North Vietnamese military strategy and kind of contextualize what the North was trying to do. Because one of the backgrounds, which doesn't really touch too much on the song, but is a background force, is that while the Buddhists were emerging in 1963 as an opposition force, from a little bit earlier, there was a communist group, a National Liberation Front, or what the South Vietnamese called the Viet Cong, the Vietnamese communists, who were an insurgency supported by the North trying to overthrow the South. So that ZM's responses are contextualized within a broader military engagement with opposition forces.
Nice. Well, and I'm also looking up a few other things as well. I know there's a professor at Bates College named Trian Nguyen, and he is, I know, working on a full-length biography of the life of Thich Quang Duc as well. I know he's been working on that for several years. I haven't been able to find a release date on it yet, but he's still a professor at Bates. And then there's also a book called Burning for the Buddha, which is about self-immolation in Chinese Buddhism, which isn't Vietnam, which is what we've been talking about. But that's another book from James A. Ben, who is a professor in Canada. So there's a few other things. But I also love the fact that this is a song, a rock song that we've been talking about, that name drops Thich Quang Duc. And there's more Thich Quang Duc songs that I found today. So here's my Thich Quang Duc playlist if you want to springboard off of Propagandy's Cop Just Out of Frame. So we have the band Cream. They have a song called Anyone for Tennis, which includes a lyric, Yellow Buddhist Monk Burning Brightly at the Zoo. That's a lyric from the song. And there's also the band Fear Factory, who has a song called Freedom or Fire. And then there's obviously Thich Quang Duc's appearance on the Rage Against the Machine 1992 debut album. I don't think there's actually a song on the record about Thich Quang Duc itself. It's more the imagery that Rage Against the Machine is addressing.
I did look back, and
Is there?
I still buy CDs still, and
It's crazy.
So the self-titled Rage CD is right next to Victory Lap. So just thinking back and seeing that today, I thought it was just a unique connection.
Chris, were you ever a Rage Against the Machine fan when that record was out? Do you have any specific memories tied to that album cover?
Yeah, I mean, it was, I think, probably the first time I saw it, because I mean, I was way too young for this photo to make its effect on myself as
Sure.
in when it was released. So, and by the time I was born, the war was long over.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I think definitely Rage Against the Machine brought it back into public consciousness,
that was
particularly in the
mine
United
too.
States and other places where you would buy a Rage CD or whatever.
Keith, was that your first awareness of Thich Quang Duc, even though before you probably didn't know his name, because I think that everybody
Yeah.
knows the picture, but not the man.
Yeah, and it wasn't probably until even later reading, I was not necessarily get an album and go through the liner notes, in 1997 and investigate further when I was in 7th grade. But reading further on after like seeing this image just kind of burn into your memory, and then kind of getting more context afterward.
So Chris, you may not know this about me, but I have another podcast called Classical Ideas. And on that show, it's an academic show where I talk to scholars of religious studies from all over the world about their research in the field. I talk to like religion journalists from major publications. I talk to Pulitzer winners. Like I talk to all kinds of amazing people about religious practice and trends within religion around the world. And so this song connected to me so much because a very well-known figure within religion popping up in my favorite band's music is quite something to me. And I really was bummed out that this song had so much swearing in it because I, as a high school teacher, I would teach units about Buddhism, and I easily could have incorporated this song as like a pop culture reference during my Buddhism unit. So I was really bummed out that I couldn't turn my absolute favorite band's music into a classroom lesson plan reference, But then I also was thinking about this song, and this song to me is like a reaction to like the risks taken by incredibly brave and virtuous people who don't know what to do when they feel that they're out of options. And there's no guarantee that anyone would have even cared about Thich Quang Duc's self-immolation, And so that's one of the big takeaways for me is like, there was no guarantee that this was going to make any impact on the world, but it did. But it didn't, that wasn't a guarantee,
Yeah, I mean, if of course I'm going to remember his name, Brown.
Malcolm Brown.
Yeah, Malcolm Brown had slept in like every other U.S. reporter. We may have gotten a description, maybe.
Yeah. Well, and Malcolm Brown got an anonymous phone call that said, "Be there for something important." And I'm doing air quotes because you can't see me. Something important. That's all he knew. So he just shows up at the street corner, not knowing what this is going to be. And then you witness something which is going to traumatize you forever. So he gets this anonymous tip that is something that you will remember in your dreams. Like it will haunt you forever.
I don't imagine being able to sleep down or live with myself seeing someone do something like this, especially imagining the out of frame of the photo, which is actually something that I was thinking about as you were talking about the cop out of frame. Is the frame is the photo frame. And since they're not in frame, we don't see them because the photo only includes him and the background monks, not the background cops on the other side. And so we literally are behind the photographer as the cops out of frames, or at least imagine Chris is that way. And that's the weird thing is that the photo transformed history while thinking about the song's connection to the photo, is that the song is really a reaction to the photo, literally the photo, not just the act, but imagining what it's like to actually see in living color the billowing red flames with the horrendous smoke and the smell of human flesh and fat as it melts, and the gross nature of the human body kind of exploding in its own little, ways as everything gets all hot, and everyone else just kind of dealing with it, and the emotional resonance of that crowded moment with the cops and whoever else who suddenly could connect the event to their own personal faith and their own personal understanding of their world and their country and what the eternal, or the kind of the cataclysmic battle that's actually unfolding in front of them regarding the fate of religious freedom in the country.
Keith,
That's a great observation.
what are some of your big takeaways, Keith?
Yeah. So for me, if I think of a teachable moment for this song, I would not use this per se in teaching about religion or even about, Vietnam or as some, bookend for a unit, but just informing my own instruction and my own actions as an educator. I kind of like what I said before, like I might have a bumper sticker, I might have a slogan in my profile on Twitter and social media, but just those things aren't enough to challenge systems of power and inequality. And it can feel perhaps somewhat hopeless to stand up against forces that are greater than us, but I'm maybe still doing the right thing as often as possible. And maybe my right thing that I do isn't going to be the same as someone else's elsewhere. So to try to do the best what I can, with the opportunities that I have where I live.
Yeah. I read a YouTube comment on the Epitaph posting of this song that I really liked. And a YouTube user says, Quang Duc's story is a lesson for the ages and a cautionary tale for all would-be tyrants. If the people you oppress are willing to perform a gesture of defiance as powerful as this one, do you think you'll ever have a chance to fully dominate them? How long do you think you'll last against this kind of conviction? How do you guys react to that quote? Do you think if frail humans are actually powerful in this moment, like Chris ends the song on and like this YouTube comment just says?
I think if we hadn't talked to Chris, I might have agreed. and I don't mean that in like a cynical way, but I just think thinking about this a lot, a lot deeper and more than just, it's hard to say. And I'll put a question mark because I don't pretend to have answers, but I want to keep thinking about it. That's for sure. But I don't know if I have an answer to that.
Well, I mean, that's a dual mind part. The duality of it all goes where on one hand, no, because, it's not like the military police force of Vietnam, South Vietnam collapsed because of this. On the other hand, though, this becomes an enduring symbol.
Mm-hmm.
This becomes a sense of kind of inspiration for people who are feeling in a similarly hopeless situation. So there is, it's like the literal didn't necessarily happen in quite the way Chris phrased it at the end of the song, but at the same time, it kind of did. So there's an ambiguity there. And I
love the ending lyrics of the song too. So he talks about the heart, a righteous calling card left upon the palace gates for the invertebrates. So I love how he refers to these powerful people that Thich Quang Duc just basically flips the bird to as the invertebrates.
Spineless.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And it says their grip on power pried apart, which does, sort of happen over time. Mm-hmm. There was a series of self-immolations from Buddhist monks and nuns in the next several months. And then the Diem regime does fall. And so Chris Hanna in this propaganda song saying that their grip on power was pried apart by one frail human being, Thich Quang Duc. But I mean, it's far more complicated than that, like you've mentioned, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, and further, I guess, developing the idea, like the NLF, the so-called VC, Viet Cong, didn't succeed the way he did. Because their goal was to do this, basically, at least some kind of a similar thing. At least in the short run, was to get rid of the government. That they didn't really. It was actually someone without a gun, without a machine gun, without military training, someone who had gone through a life of intentional poverty to reach enlightenment, who engaged in an act of self-enlightenment of a sort to achieve something that they couldn't do.
Do either of you have any more thoughts before we rate this bad boy and bring this conversation to a close?
The one thing I will say is, as a university professor, and I can play the song with all the F-bombs I want.
Yeah.
So as a personal note, I was I was like, oh, that's right. You guys have those kind of
It's
had those
different.
considerations. Yep.
I'd have to bribe my 8th graders with candy.
Yeah, I don't know if I would. I mean, maybe on a unit on, if I was going to teach anything about maybe radicalism post 1990s for the Seattle generation, such as it were. What happens to their very fervent, very powerful politics that at the start of the 1990s is able to make it seem like global warming might be about to be conquered, to the moment where we have today, of course, where, of course, it's basically the worst possible outcome happened.
Yeah.
I think this song might be could serve in that sense as a primary source evidence for the students to kind of grapple with how people who tried and kind of seemed like things were working and have had moments of change grapple with looking back at their lives. In the same way you could do the same thing with like the 1960s radicals and going through their recollections in the 80s and 90s, especially the 80s when Reagan's president.
So Keith, what in the scheme of all propaganda songs, how do you rate Cop Just Set a Frame?
I'm going to give it a 4.5. If I think back to my rating scale of a song I want to see live, a song I'm going to kind of always play when it comes on, I'm going to sing every word to. This was one that the last time they played in Chicago at the Metro, I was on the stage, like ribs pressed against it, screaming as hard as I could, singing along. So for that, it's a solid 4.5 for me. How about you, Greg?
Why is it not a 5?
I don't know if I have any specific reason other than, I don't know.
Just a 5 for those really magical songs.
Yeah.
Everything's a 5, right?
Yeah. Not everything can be. And I think, this isn't going to be a song that I'm going to play right away. First off, maybe to introduce someone who hasn't kept up with the band, in 10 or 15 years, but not like, oh, here, check out my favorite band of all time. This might come a little bit later in that playlist.
Yeah. My playlist, that if I was showing somebody for the first time, I would be going like all supporting cast or failed states. That would be like my, or speculative fiction. So for me, like whenever I was thinking about rating this song, I originally had it as a 4. And then I've had so much fun during this conversation that I edited my comment to say 4.5. But like this conversation took this song to a totally new level for me.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Because this conversation has just been so rich, so varied, and so full that I was like, how in the world can I not rate this song a little higher based on the amazing conversation we've just had? And the diversity within the song is truly stellar. But it is, it's a super dad song as well. So it's not like it's not a 5 for me because I think it could bang just a little harder. I'm not saying I need all propaganda songs to be like, Back to the Motor League or anything, but for me, I vary. Like I think that 4.5 for me is being generous. Like I think I almost want to stick with my original 4. But my gosh, what a great conversation. Chris,
yeah, what would you give it, Chris?
Well,
now, can I explain our rating system first?
Yeah.
Sure, go ahead.
So whenever I say 1 out of 5, we are only rating it against other propaganda songs. Because if you rate it against all music in the world and you give it a 2, you know what I mean? Like you can't compare your favorite band against other bands. So within our 1 to 5 scale, we're only rating it in the catalog of propaganda themselves.
Yeah, I mean, from the moment I heard it, it was easily a 4.5. Victory Lap was an amazing album for me, and I don't know if I could rate the total content of the albums against each other very accurately, but Victory Lap has some of my most favorite propaganda songs and has such like important, emotionally rich, really kind of varied musical moments. And I think this song kind of speaks to that moment in their songwriting where as we pointed out, there is some of this. There is this thrash element that survived from the 2000 Empire, today's Empire Tomorrow's Ashes turn, where suddenly they're playing thrashy music when we expected, like the Bay Area tinted anarcho skater punk and prairie poetry of the prior age, and suddenly they're trying to play a little bit like Sacrifice or something like that. And this speaks to both elements.
It totally does.
Yeah.
Like I feel like without the shreddy part in the middle of this song that is, very metal influenced, I feel like, the very melodic stuff could go on any Propagandhi song. So you have a super timeless sound, where it's like, it almost is like name and address withheld. You know what I mean? So it has this very, very melodic part, but then it has that middle part that changes it up, that shows you like, wow, this band has changed so much over the years as well. Like these are like 48-year-old people making this record who have like a lifetime of making music behind them. And so you see their very wide variety of sounds that they've created over their career, all taking place within this extremely short, compact song. So it's a pretty good accomplishment. And I love how we've all basically talked ourselves into giving it the same rating. That's really funny to me.
At least a 4 across the board. So the highest, it's song 2 that we've done, episode number 2, and it's the highest song so far.
Yep. Well, gentlemen, this has been an absolutely wonderful conversation for me. This is the Unscripted Moments podcast, a podcast about Propagandhi. This episode has been about the song Cop Just Out of Frame off Victory Lap. And Chris Deutsch, thank you so much for joining us for this, to be our special guest, to dive so much more deeply into the history of this. We are super grateful to you for your, willingness to come on and spend time with us, talk about your areas of interest in history, but also some of the things that this song and this band mean to you. And we know that we would love to have you back on the show again.
Yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure talking my favorite band, my favorite subject matter history, and connecting my passions, my scholarship, my work to the thing that relaxes me and invigorates me better than anything else ever has.
We'll see you next time, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. Unscripted Moments, a podcast about Propagandhi, is created, hosted, and produced by Keith Goff and Greg Soden. Musical clips on this show are composed and performed by Propagandhi. Artwork on the show is by Justin Santora, who can be reached at justinsantora.com. You can find us on Twitter at PropagandhiPod and on Instagram at PropagandhiPod. If you like the show, please drop a rating on your podcast app of choice and subscribe to receive future episodes. Tell your friends. Thank you so much for listening.